Alright, in this video I want to take a look at how we can use Visual Studio Code to debug our application, our server code. So this will be mostly specific to Visual Studio Code, but the first bit will work if you want to use any sort of node debugger, such as Node Inspector or whatever. So what we need to do is we need to jump into our Gulp file. We need to locate where we run our server, which is in the function, not surprisingly, called run server. And notice how it returns gulp nodemon, an instance of nodemon which is going to execute our server. Now here's the problem. The problem is that nodemon will launch our server code into another process, but it won't enable debugging. In order to debug a node application, we need to say something like node, and then like, let's say node --debug, and then something like server.js. And what you'll see right here is it says debugger listening on port 5858, which is the default port. However, the Gulp nodemon plugin does not support a debug flag. So if I passed in debug equals true here, it won't recognize that. It has no code in there to recognize it. But it does expose a fancy little way for us to pass that debug flag into Node. And that is by replacing the command it executes when it tries to launch our application. So if we had another option called exec and set it to node --debug, it will then launch Node with the debug flag. So now if I do gulp dev and hit enter, we will see the debugger is listening on port 5858. So with that out of the way, now I'm going to show you the Visual Studio Code specific way to put this together. This will be different depending on what editor you're using. But in VS Code, the folder, let's open up our launch.json and let's create another configuration. And that configuration will have a name of attached to server. Actually, I don't like the with source maps on that. I'll just leave the one named attached to Chrome and this one named attached to server. The type will be node. The request will be attach. The port will be the default. In fact, I probably don't even need to specify that port, but I will anyway. The address will be localhost, which I also believe is the default. The restart will be false, so it doesn't restart when it's terminated. That's going to be handled all by node mod and not us. Source maps will be true. The local root is going to be set to workspace root, similar to how we have the web root set to workspace root there. And then this is important. The outdir will be set to workspace root followed by /build. Notice that the workspace root has its money, open curly, workspace root, close curly. Workspace root is lowercase w, uppercase r. So this last option is very important. This last option tells Visual Studio Code where the source maps are located. If we don't provide this option, it won't let us debug properly. It won't. We would have to go into the actual generated files and set breakpoints. But by specifying the outdir, we'll be able to set breakpoints on the pre-compiled source code. And that's it. So now what we need to do is we need to go to debug, because by default it's going to be wanting to run attached to Chrome every time we hit F5. And I'm going to switch this to attached to server. Because we're only ever going to be debugging one thing at a time. Either we're debugging the server or we're debugging the client, but never simultaneously. So make sure you have attached to server selected. You know what? I'm going to rename these actually. I'm going to call this Chrome :attach, and I'm going to call this server :attach. And the reason I'm changing that is because with the resolution that I have right now, it cuts off the words. So now I can select Chrome and I can see clearly Chrome, and I can select server and clearly see server. But now I should be able to hit F5 and we're debugging. I can tell that we're debugging because the pause button showed up. Instead of it just sitting there and not showing up, the pause button did show up, which means we are attached. We should also be able to see the console window, the debug console, but we're not printing anything out from the server, so it doesn't really matter. So now let's test this. I'm going to go into source, server.js. I'm just going to throw some bogus code into our app get request thing. I'm going to say let I equals 3, let woe equals I times 30, console log, woe is woe. Now, notice what happens when I hit Control S. When I hit Control S, it'll get rebuilt, and then NodeMon will completely kill the task. And by killing the process, Visual Studio Code will automatically detach. So make sure you know when you're detached and when you're not detached. But now we can hit F5 again and reattach. I'm going to set a breakpoint right here, and then I'm going to open up Chrome. And then on Chrome, I'm going to refresh on a different monitor. And when I refresh, check this out. We are now debugging. And I can step into, I can hover over these variables. Right now, I is undefined, but I can hit F10, and now I is 3. Hit F10 again. And if I open up my console and hit F10 one more time, it doesn't look like the debug console is printing out. But that doesn't really bother me because we have our console window over here on the left-hand side. What I care about is the fact that we get a call stack. Like I can step all the way back through the Express framework and debug it myself and figure out how Express works behind the scenes. Fantastic way to explore code. I can set breakpoints, I can add watches, and I have my local. Actually, the console, I should be able to execute arbitrary code as well. Module, I don't know. But that's not the point. The point is I get my ability to inspect variables and step through. And then I can hit F5, and it'll just finish the request, and now my browser window is open to the right page. But yeah, that is debugging in Node. So be sure when you're debugging, you know if the... Oh, I just got confused for a second. Be sure when you are debugging in Chrome or in Visual Studio or in Node, you know which option you have selected here in the debug window on Visual Studio Code. Know if you're connecting to Chrome or server when you hit F5. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and delete this bogus code that I don't care about. And just to recap, all we had to do was add an exec option for our run server. And we could have also done that for tests as well. In fact, we could also have our test watch. Where's the watch tests? Yeah, the run server test. I can also add the exec node debug flag and maybe change the port, and then be able to go in and in the Visual Studio Code add a new launch configuration that debugs the test as well. But after we changed that exec parameter, all we did was add a new launch configuration that attaches to the node process. And with that wraps this video up.